And the next speaker is Tiffany Broyles, and Tiffany is the Director of Sustainability and Resilience at GBBN, and she's providing a strategic leadership for sustainable design. This is a field that is really, really interesting right now because she's managing the work for the GBBN Sustainability Action Network. And also she's pushing educational initiatives related to resilience. So something that is directly connected to Teresa's question about what we have to do to work in this field. No? So she's also pushing initiatives about well-being and environmental design. And her work includes green building projects from international supertall mixed use until to single-story existing building renovation. So you are covering all the scales that one architect loves to work with. And Tiffany is also focused on developing the low carbon and wellness portfolio at GBBN. So we will ask you, first of all, what is GBBN and how you are advancing in these circular economy concepts in the region and how to translate it into our architecture and urban planning, let's say, profession and jobs that we have to do. So thank you for being with us, Tiffany, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Ignacy. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And thanks to Natalia and everyone at the New York City Architecture Biennial. I'm really happy to be here and I appreciate the invitation to speak. So I am Tiffany Broyles Yost, as mentioned, the Director of Sustainability and Resilience at GBBN. And my passion is really for using design to create healthier and more sustainable buildings and cities where people thrive. So I spent the first 20 years of my career as a designer and sustainability consultant, really focused on the design and development and operations of green buildings, and shifting more towards the kind of health and wellness and circular economy aspects later on. I've worked on projects in over 20 countries, mostly in major metropolitan areas, where you tend to have clients who are focused on sustainability and looking for that in kind of Class A buildings. I'm now dedicated to advancing regenerative design and health-focused strategies more broadly in some of the smaller cities where I now live in Kentucky, and the organization I work for works in much more smaller areas. And I think although the process is different than in some of the major cities, I think we can still create and operate health-enhancing, net zero carbon buildings that are generous and abundant and beautiful in every city. So that's what I'd like to talk about today, how we as architects and designers can really move beyond some of the sustainability and resilience conversations that we've been having the last few decades and really aim for these kind of more holistic design excellence in our work. So I'm going to share my screen. Great. I'm assuming someone will tell me if you can't see my slides.
Yes, we are seeing it perfectly.
Perfect. Okay, great. So I want to talk a little bit about the kind of current state of sustainable design, why this matters, and what the role of architects is. And then I'll walk through how we've developed our design process and some of the performance goals and things that we've set. And then I'll share a couple of project examples. So at GBBN, we really talk about that positively affecting people is the most important thing we do. And this was really important to me when I initially joined in 2019, because I'm really interested in making architecture that helps create a better world. And I see my role as Director of Sustainability and Resilience as really being a catalyst for great design. So at GBBN, this aspect of the firm that was really focused on the people and not just the kind of performance data was really important to me. And the firm has been around since 1958. We have 5 offices in Beijing, Cincinnati, Louisville, Minneapolis, and Pittsburgh. And we're really working on a variety of different projects, from healthcare and the arts to civic and community, workplace, and higher education. So that gives us an opportunity to develop these kind of strategies, human-focused design strategies for sustainability, really in all different types of projects. So we also share a lot of our insights through speaking and publishing and hosting seminars, and are really interested in kind of making a difference for our clients and also in the communities we serve. So lately we've been talking and publishing a lot about sustainability and resilience and well-being. But I think the question for today is really, how does the built environment impact people and the planet? And what are the opportunities for us as designers to positively affect change? So we know that buildings typically generate about 40% of the annual global greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a lot of pollution coming from our industry. And about 2/3 of the building area that exists today will still be here in 2050. So we can't just make new, highly efficient buildings. We really need to focus on creating net zero carbon new buildings, but also renovating our existing buildings to be net zero as quickly as possible if we really want to prevent a kind of catastrophic increase in global temperature. And right now, that renovation work is really only about 0.5 to 1% of the building stock annually. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And the other question, I think, because we do design building for people, is what really determines health. Our buildings and cities have a lot of effect on our physical health. It's the social and physical environment that has the greatest impact, more than 50%, on our health. So there's really an impetus to create buildings that do help sustain the environment, but really improve your connection to other people and your connection to nature. But why do we care, and what are some of the risks? I know our last speaker talked a bit about the risks and how to assess them, and I think that's a question that we have. Why do we care about this as a firm and as a group of designers, and what makes our clients care? In many of the regions that we work, energy and land are cheap, energy codes are lax, and clients really have limited expectations for what architecture can do for people and cities. So we really need to understand what their concerns are so that we can help them create solutions to address them. And oftentimes in these locations, our risks are not easily identifiable. Climate risk for us is often prolonged extreme heat, flooding, and extended power outages. But they're not the kind of surges and things you see in areas more affected by like hurricanes and things like that. So we really need to understand what motivates us as designers and also our clients so that we can really determine the best path forward for ourselves and communicate effectively with our clients. So maybe we want to make people comfortable. We want to improve their health. We want to connect them to nature. We need to figure out what story resonates with the clients, what their sort of areas of focus are. And then there are many solutions, many different buildings that can address these different issues. We also want to figure out, what do we gain by addressing sustainability and resilience? How do we help clients? How do we help projects? What are the benefits of an operable window? What are the benefits of being a building that can operate with no power? How do you serve your community in a kind of blackout or other situations that you couldn't have before? So as we address these kind of risks and determine those concerns, we can really develop our perspective and hopefully improve the sustainability and resilience of our work. That's really the broad goal. But where do we start? How do we create a kind of effective approach to low carbon health enhancing buildings. So I go back to this image again, because if positively affecting people is the most important thing that we do, then we know we have to improve individual well-being in our projects and design net zero carbon buildings. So from a firm perspective, if we want to start doing that in our projects, we've made a couple commitments. We've signed on to the AA 2030 commitment, stating that we'll design all of our projects to be net zero energy by 2030 and net zero carbon by 2050. And then we've also joined the Cincinnati 2030 district as both a partner and a business member to reduce our building energy use, water consumption, and transportation emissions 50% by 2030. So these are not the most ambitious possible goals, but we are starting to track our carbon emissions. We're starting to keep metrics, and it's really important for us to start to measure things so that we can see our progress. We've also, we have offices both here in the US and abroad. So we're trying to think more broadly about how we operate our business and the role that architects can play. So we've started to align our approach to the UN SDGs and really make sure that we're thinking not just what our clients today are thinking about, but globally, how we can talk about these issues and make sure that we're on the right path. So as we start to work with different clients and different community organizations, part of the excitement, I think, for us is seeing different organizations at different stages of their sustainability journey, because there's really quite a variety in the places that we work. And throughout this process, we try to think like nature and really design out waste. So whether that's wasted energy, wasted water, and other materials and resources, we're trying to shift from this kind of linear economy where we take materials out of the ground, make something out of them, and then throw those materials away, and shift towards more circular closed loop systems where we can maintain the highest value of each of the products and materials for the longest amount of time. And we do that by maintaining them, repairing, reusing, refurbishing, and then finally by recycling them. And this is really only possible if we can separate all the different components into the kind of technical materials from the sort of biological or organic materials. So essentially separating out the natural from the man-made. So we try to think about this and set up these systems as we're designing. But what's the process internally? How do we get started? My primary goal in my office is to really integrate sustainable design effectively into our design process so that good design and sustainable design are the same thing. But we really have to develop a plan for that because it's hard to get people to change the status quo. So we started to gather staff into some focus groups that we held throughout the offices. We did not reinvent the wheel. We worked with a lot of the wonderful tools and materials that the AAA have provided, including the Framework for Design Excellence. And we wrote a sustainability action plan. We made it concise. We made it high-level bullet points so that people would actually read it. And then we formed a network of around 45 people, and we started gathering data. So about a quarter of the firm has joined, and it's at all levels of experience from every single one of our markets, each office, and all the different kinds of roles within the firm, from IT and administration to marketing and interiors. So we developed a set of 5 goals based upon what we learned from the focus groups. We really wanted to create a design process that connects the environmental metrics and design throughout the projects. We wanted to track metrics that helped us evaluate those design strategies and inform our decision-making. We're also focused on engaging with the community where we work so that we can really be a voice for sustainability, resilience, and social justice. We're also trying to train staff in the technical skills. We have to be able to provide the right knowledge and the broad concepts. And then finally, we want to make sure in our firm operations that our values are reflected in how we operate our business. So what does this mean? Well, from a design process, we're really working to integrate the principles of sustainability and resilience into the design process, primarily by asking the right questions at the right time, and then setting measurable performance goals on every single project. We also analyze buildings. We often use Cove Tool. We set up different kinds of goals, whether that's EUI performance, water targets, certification goals, but things that are measurable so that we can go back and track how we're doing. And while this is the kind of plan to model on every project and set these goals, we don't always achieve that, but we're doing it more often, and it's starting to become part of the kind of standard process. As I mentioned, we use the framework, the AIA framework for design excellence on all of our projects. And the framework really helps us organize our thinking holistically. It facilitates conversations with clients and consultants, and it also helps us talk to the community and the places that we serve. This helps us set meaningful targets and actual goals that we can check the outcome on. And then because it's so holistic, it helps us celebrate kind of small wins, even on projects that maybe aren't as innovative and able to achieve as much as some other projects. It's rating system agnostic, so it helps us focus on overall goals rather than point tallies. And then by discussing the kind of the priorities and the goals with our clients, it gives us agency as architects to determine which kind of design solutions actually meet the client's needs, rather than identifying specific strategies or solutions that can be added or removed a la carte. So it kind of helps us avoid the VE process in this case. As I mentioned, on the metrics side, we are collecting energy use intensity and lighting power density data on all of our active projects for the last couple of years, and working with clients to actually model and track that information. We also track based on other criteria for projects, and then set up our performance goals. We're at about 45% better than baseline, which is not quite where we want to be, but we're making progress each year, which is moving in the right direction. We work with a lot of nonprofits, community organizations to share our work. We are often doing speaking to kind of stand up and share what we know, so that there's benefit to everyone. Our Sustainability Action Network provides kind of in-house advocacy and training. And that's really how we are starting to shift that status quo and change the way that we design. And then finally, we're trying to make sure that we are running our business in alignment with our goals by minimizing waste, lowering our carbon footprint, and focusing on staff well-being, and doing all of that in a kind of equitable way. The Action Network is also focused on several initiatives that are very deliverable focused, so that we're making, that we have a set of goals, and we really facilitate progress and reduce a lot of just kind of standing around and meeting together. So we also provide these kind of tools internally and set a roadmap. The timeline is really a kind of guideline that lets you know what you should be doing when, so that you can achieve those sustainability goals. And all the kind of steps and the responsibilities are all laid out with the deliverables defined and the responsible parties identified. And we're constantly refining and these kind of workflows and creating new tools for our staff. So I want to share a couple projects so you can see how this is reflected in the actual work. So Tree Pittsburgh is where we worked with a nonprofit called Tree Pittsburgh to create a net zero energy headquarters that really aligns with their mission of conservation and stewardship of the environment, particularly Pittsburgh's urban forests. So they needed an office and an education space for their employees and visitors. It's located on the Allegheny. And it was really important for Tree Pittsburgh to have a home that aligned with their mission to enhance community vitality and do it in a way that enhanced their goal of showing the health and social and environmental benefits of trees. So they provide education and advocacy. They do a lot of neighborhood plantings, but they also operate a full on-site nursery, and their staff is really connected to nature, likes being outside. So we wanted to make sure that that remained part of what they had at their new space. Connection to outdoors, a lot of daylights and vegetation right up to the building. But the existing site was not in good shape. It was highly toxic. It was a highly toxic brownfield that had been a past manufacturing site for some steel plants. So while we were focused on low energy and low carbon, occupant health and environmental health were also really important. So we worked really hard not to disturb the site and develop a kind of really lightweight set of foundations that could just be pinned, that would minimize the drilling and excavation and therefore cost for this nonprofit. So a couple key drivers were really cost and performance. We wanted to minimize waste for the project, make sure they had this nice connection to the outdoors, make it fully accessible to wheeled transportation, create a big gathering space, and go for LEED Platinum certification. So just an image of the kind of coming up to the site. There was a lot of restoration of the existing trees, and also because the site had been quite damaged. In the plan, you can see some of the key elements. There's office space on the inside, the nursery and service yard on the exterior, some meeting spaces, this big community porch, which was really important to them to have this kind of outdoor living room, and then a series of solar panels on the roof. And the solar panels really became a key design driver because with a very tight budget and that was tied to some specific funding and grants related to renewable energy, the solar panels became a key component in determining the size of the building. So we worked with the client and the engineers to determine how much PV they could purchase, how much energy that would produce, and then right-size the building to use less energy than they could produce on site, and then that helped us create a net zero energy building. And 100% of the electricity is generated by the 60 kilowatt PV array. It's a very simple system clipped to the roof. We have really highly insulated walls, triple glazed windows, and optimize massing and orientation with appropriate shading to really make this all work. Some images from above, so you can see how the panels fit. Because of the site location right there on Allegheny and its kind of toxic history, water management was also a key driver. So 100% of the roof water is collected for irrigation on the site. They are quite far away from a lot of the utilities. They use all low flow fixtures, some waterless fixtures, and most of the water is sent not into the river, but drains back into the sewage so it can be cleaned. To minimize waste again and to lower the construction cost, prefabricated and modular system were used. So these units could be made in a warehouse that minimize the amount of cutting and changes on site, built there and then assembled very quickly on site. So you can see some of the different modules here. And this is some of the images from the warehouse where it was manufactured. There were, of course, some components that were built, including the outdoor trellis that were built on site, some of the connections made there as well. And throughout, they needed to have kind of multi-purpose functional space for their mission of education, but also as a resource generator. So you can have events here. all the spaces are daylit and connected to the outdoors. It's a couple more images. And in the end, the project performed. We're really happy to report that it's performing as intended, resulting in cost and energy neutral operation, which is really significant for a small nonprofit because they can't raise funds to pay their energy bills. There's no capital campaign around paying your utilities. And after 3 years, each year they've had a net negative in terms of their overall usage, and they have a credit of over $8,000 on their utility account, which is a big deal for such a small nonprofit. So that's an example of really collaboration with the nonprofit to develop the goals and to align with their mission, and then move in some of those kind of circular closed loop ways. On 5th and Dinwiddie, East and West, which is another project, also in Pittsburgh, we were really excited to work with Bridging the Gap developers because we had this kind of idea that, like many of you, I'm sure, that good design is sustainable design, and their approach was really that good development was equitable development. So together we were interested in this project. So at 5th and Dinwiddie, we really worked with the client to balance the needs of the community groups and really find a way. It's a mixed use, affordable housing and some retail and workplace development. But we worked really hard to create sustainable development there without providing a kind of displacement of the existing neighbors, and really coming up with opportunities that would maintain the kind of nature of this neighborhood. There has been really robust community involvement from the start. This is part of an eco-innovation district and the Pittsburgh 2030 district. So there were a lot of good things kind of set here to move the project forward. So when we started, we worked with ROS Consulting and our engineers to really start from the desired outcomes. So what was important to the stakeholders that we had met with in terms of how the building will perform in its operations? How do we set those kind of key performance indicators? What metrics, we were trying to figure out what metrics would demonstrate action, and then how to measure performance against the kind of these goals. So we knew that community and energy use and indoor air quality were all important. Creating a nice welcoming space were priorities. So how could we actually go through and measure? And we went through and set energy use goals. What's the parts per million in the atmosphere? How much waste? Set measurable goals and determined metrics based on some of the different certifications. So Passive House made the most sense for this project to address both energy use and energy bills and reduce that energy burden for the occupants, and also improve the overall energy, the indoor air quality within the units and the air quality within the neighborhood. So the Passive House certification really yields the big energy reduction and performance accountability. Fitwell focuses on indoor environmental quality and kind of qualitative health improvements, while Reset Air there really looks at specific metrics for indoor environmental quality. So those are the certifications that we're going for, but we were missing some sustainable material standards, some water reduction goals, and some of the social equity aspects. So even though we weren't going for a WELL certification or a LEED certification, we used some of that language to set in our specifications goals for compliance. We also made sure that we were focused on working with minority-owned and women-owned businesses, including the developer. The project is located in Uptown, which is part of the Eco-Innovation District, and it's connected also to the Hill District. So you can see here that the site is really kind of cut by Dinwiddie Street, And we have about 20,000 square foot addition onto an existing public works building. And then on the west side, there's about 200,000 square feet of mixed use and residential space. So that includes 171 blended residential units, 20% of which are affordable. And then commercial space in the east side includes a kind of clean energy job training for local residents, flexible space for the building and the community to use, and a co-working space. There's some retail space on the main corridor there along Fifth Avenue, which you can see here in the diagram. This is looking at the east side. So this includes that renovation and addition. On this side, to meet that passive house target, we really worked strategically to design the windows to maximize views, but also have that kind of useful solar gain without any excessive heat gain. And this is the location where that workforce training program is as well. On the west side, this is Fifth and Dinwiddie West. Again, focusing on the right window to wall area ratio and the kind of appropriate placement. In both cases, we have a very low energy use intensity. On this side, it's a PEUI of 16, which is just shy of that 80% reduction goal that we have for the AA 2030 commitment. And it's exciting to see these kind of spaces and this kind of energy use, particularly on an affordable housing project. So there's a mix of units, and with that kind of energy reduction, it significantly reduces the energy burden. Your utility bills are really quite low. And the mix of units includes units specifically designed, not just affordable units, but some that are specifically designed for mobility impaired or sensory impaired. So it's not simply just about creating a diversity of income levels, but really creating access for many different types of families within this neighborhood. Another image of the west side. There are also some interior views, and the finishes are really the same in the affordable and the market rate units. So there's consistency there. Indoor air quality was really important here, and that was considered throughout all the material specifications. Passive house, again, typically uses about 75% less energy. So we wanted to make sure that that was both high quality space and also very efficient. And throughout the project, there's really a consistent effort to connect residents with nature, with the neighborhood, and provide that through views and access and creating comfortable public space. And it's really a significant shift from the current condition, which had been, vacated on this side. And then finally, that experience of nature, the access to transit, those kind of comfortable public spaces really enhances the community. So it's not just about creating a building for the people who live there, but really adding value to this neighborhood in terms of public space and access. And doing that all in a way that's, quite energy efficient and a good product. So, where does this leave us in terms of progress and impact? As I've said, we've signed on to these two commitments, but, how are we doing? So we do have a net zero energy project, Tree Pittsburgh, that I've showed you. We have 12 other projects that are on track to meet the current goal of being 80% better than baseline for our 22 portfolio. And even though we were only at about 45% better than our baseline for last year, we anticipate that this is going to improve significantly in our 2022 data, because we're starting to see more of those results from the changes we've made. We're tracking our carbon emissions as well and developing plans to reduce that. But it's so important, although you can't see the names of the projects here, tracking this data and being able to compare it across our different markets. So whether it's higher education or the arts market or healthcare, and see, this is projecting the predicted EUI on all of our projects. This big plateau of 42% better than baseline is where we don't have data and we're assuming code compliance. So this really starts to provide some healthy competition for our staff to say, oh, this is really great. This project you're working on is 70% better than baseline. How are you guys doing that? Or how come you guys don't know how much better you're doing? Where's your energy model data? And we're doing this across our major renovations, which have a slightly different goal of about 30%, and on our interiors projects, which are looking at lighting power density. So we're trying to ingrain throughout the staff that EUI is a number you should know on your project. And progress is slow, but we're moving the needle, and that's what's important. We're talking about this on every project. We're shifting change as we go forward. We have a kind of year's worth of data that we're now trying to sort through. We've tracked emissions from our business travel. We're pulling it together from our utilities. So we're trying to really decipher what this means. Are we polluting at an average rate, or how can we do better? So we're starting to pull that together and develop a commuting plan and emissions reduction plans as well. But throughout, we're really trying to make sure that we, again, still focus on the well-being. So our largest office just recently received a Fitwell 2-star certification, which was exciting. It's one of the few projects in the state of Ohio, and we're trying to roll out these kind of strategies, the biophilic design, making sure that all of our offices are well daylit. We have a different specification that we're using on our finishes. In all of our offices, so that that we're, even if we're not certifying each of the spaces, that we're carrying that knowledge through. So I think this is where we've started, so that I think the biggest thing for us is that we're trying to change the status quo, focus in on this, and fully integrate it into our design process. And we're having a lot of success, even though we're working in places where, the odds are not quite so stacked. I think in New York City, we find that, land is expensive, energy is expensive, and clients are kind of already asking for this. So I'm excited about the progress, and hopefully this will help other organizations start to track their own progress. So thanks for having me today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. It has been very, very interesting. Let's begin with Eduardo Saldivia. He has one question for you, and then we will try to create some debate, because you have been introducing very, very nice concepts. So, Eduardo.
Thank you, Ignacy. Yes, we have a audience question for Tiffany. Tiffany, you was talking about the collaboration and the work together with another architectural offices. The question of the audience is about that. How do you collaborate with that and other architectural offices?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of, we do that in two ways. So primarily through some of the AIA organizations, whether it's the Committee on the Environment or through the Sustainable Design Leaders Network, that is essentially a group of a lot of people in my role, where you try to kind of collaborate and share ideas, essentially with the idea of, even though you may be competitors, what information can you share that brings up the field, right? So those are kind of more broad professional ways that we share. But other than that, I think we try to be very open with the work that we're doing, and we publish a lot of our own research. and try to get out and talk with groups, because I think we can't do this kind of work fast enough. We can't make our buildings more sustainable and more energy efficient nearly as quickly as we'd like. So I think it's good to work with other architects, and I hope there's enough work out there for all of us to not have to worry too much about the competition.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you, Tiffany. And I have some questions, because probably it's different, the conception from USA and Europe. In order to understand well this 2030 net zero energy in front of the net zero carbon for 2050, which are the, let's say, the topics that are different between energy and carbon for you?
Sure. So, right now, I think, well, over the last few decades, I think there had been initially a lot of conversation around energy use, right? So how to make our buildings net zero energy. The challenge there, though, is that when we focus only on energy, we're really just looking at kind of the operational side of the building. And with large scale buildings like high rises, it's very difficult to make a building net zero energy on site, right? Because you have a whole lot of building and you can't put much renewable, you can't put a lot of PV on top of a skyscraper, for example. So I think the conversation has shifted from just energy to carbon, because we're looking at both operational energy and operational carbon, which is all the carbon and pollution that we're releasing in the operations of the building, and going back to all the way through to embodied carbon, which is all of the carbon released from the extraction, the manufacturing, the construction, the deconstruction of the building. And that's, the operational carbon is only part of the picture. And I think as we continue to build more and more efficient buildings, that embodied carbon is a much greater percentage of the carbon pollution and emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere. So that's why we're kind of shifting from this sort of operational side to the broader embodied carbon conversation.
Because the embodied carbon, in some way, do you think that it could be solved with modular construction, in the sense that right now, for example, today in Barcelona, there is the Modular Building Institute European Summit. So MBI from USA is right now in Barcelona, where I'm established. And modular construction is something that seems that could solution the fact of the embodied, the fact of we can begin to measure the embodied carbon in our materials, because you are controlling exactly what is happening inside one factory while you are manufacturing a house, no?
Mm-hmm.
A house or a container or a module, etc. No? But also, I do think that, for example, in Europe, in order to exchange ideas and knowledge, no, in Europe, we have not still one database about all the embodied carbon in all the materials and all the products and all the building systems that we are using, you know? So it's difficult when you want to measure that. At the end, you go to very extensive and general databases, but that they are not connected, for example, with a BIM digital model, no? So it would be really nice that when you are finishing your project, you could press one button, no? And after clicking, you know, the number of CO2 grams that you have been using for, or that is thought that your project will use, no? Well, I'm one of let's say that we think that something that will affect positively our society is modular construction in that sense, no? Because it's when we are able to introduce circularity also, no? And to think about this idea of having a materials passport, no? At the end, you do not have one building, but you have a list of materials and assets that are composing that building. And if there is an end of its life, we can recover all of these materials and to reuse, to recycle, to replan, etc. No?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of potential for modular construction to do that because it is more controlled, right? So that would suggest that it would be easier to tie all the materials within each module into a building information model, into a BIM, so that you know exactly what's in it and you can track what components are in that module. And I think that's a key idea of a circular economy within the building industry is being able to use your building as a bank of materials, right? So if we can start that from the point of construction, I think that's really positive. And using modular construction and prefabricated construction is one way to do that, but also just using the kind of basic, limiting the amount of like bespoke components that you have in a building enhances that as well. So when you're using kind of the standard materials in standard sizes, I think you could do that. There's an opportunity there as well to minimize waste. But I think the challenge there is that while the modular would definitely help us with a new construction and renovation, I think we need to figure out how can we start to deconstruct our existing buildings or refurbish them in ways that we're not just tearing them up when we take them down, right? So, how do you deconstruct a building with the same kind of care that we put them together, so they're not destroying the materials that are still valuable in our existing buildings? So I think that's a big challenge, and one that, from a design perspective, how do you design for deconstruction? How do you minimize your wet trades and make mechanical connections? But also, is the construction industry ready to take things apart in that way? And can they build that into their cost? Because if you're a construction industry, construction company, you could say, we don't just build things, like there's a whole revenue system for taking things apart. That would seem like a pretty interesting business opportunity.
That's right. Eduardo, I think that we have received another question, right?
Yes, thank you, Ignacy. One last question for Tiffany. You can explain what programs you use to determine the carbon in a building, the carbon foot from a building. Do you use some specific software for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we've kind of tried to take two approaches. One is to make sure that we understand the broad concepts about embodied carbon, so that we're going in and trying to figure out how much carbon is in everything, and essentially wasting a bunch of time. So before we go in and use kind of analytical tools, we want to understand the concepts so that we are using them in a way that's effective. So that being said, from an embodied carbon perspective, we want to focus on the structure, the facade or the envelope, and then go and talk about all the finishes, because the embodied carbon in the structure and the building envelope or facade is going to be much larger than all the materials on the interior. And so I feel like we need to say that, because when we first started looking at some of the tools, we've started using Tally, which was developed by Karen Timberlake, and we also are using EC3, And we were going into some test projects, putting all this information in about all these different materials, and it was kind of small impact compared to, the structure. So I think, before you dive into the software, I think it's useful to just make sure you're understanding the concept, the broad concepts, so that you analyze the right things. But yes, Tally, EC3, one-click LCA is also a good tool, although we're not using that one yet, but there's a few good tools out there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Eduardo. And something that probably part of the audience doesn't know, because you have been showing LEED well, but you have shown two new certifications or compliance bodies that are Fitwel and Reset. Could you explain us which are, if there are differences between WELL, LEED, and others that exist? Why are you choosing these ones?
So Fitwel is a certification system focused on health and wellness. It's focused heavily on kind of public health, and it's all research based. It's not terribly dissimilar to WELL, but it's, they're both wellness certifications. They have slightly different areas of focus. Fitwel is really focused on kind of public health and kind of broad stroke things that you can do to improve the public health of the people coming through your building. It's a really great system. We've seen a fair amount of traction for it in the markets in which we work, because it was originally developed for facility managers, so it's quite easy to understand and operate and use. And that it's based on design intent. There's not measuring afterwards, but it's still quite effective. Reset is very specifically related to indoor air quality, so it's honed in just on that's the primary topic there. So unlike LEED, which is more holistic in its approach, Fitwel is strictly focused on occupant health, and Reset Air is focused on indoor air quality.
Mm-hmm. And also, when Amaya in the talk before was explaining us the necessity of these new skills for resilience, let's say in your case, in order to affect positively and to be so collaborative, etc., which would be the skills that we would have to add in our profile, let's say, or in our syllabus or in our methodology, so how we can learn to affect in a positive way, instead of thinking that our solution is the best that exists in the world and we want to impose that, etc. So how you would define this main behavior that we would have to add or to learn, to add in our projects?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think the big challenge is to, as a designer, is to be able to move from the kind of whole scale of the building and its impact on the urban environment down to the individual experience of the user. So I think constantly shifting between those different scales of impact is really important and helps you make sure that you're making decisions that are good from various perspectives, right? So on a healthcare building, for example, we want to make sure that it's has an urban presence and contributes to the kind of planning and spatial development of the city. But then you need to think also about the access to transportation for the people who are being served. How do you get there? What's the arrival like? And go back to the scale of the individual, like what does it feel like to come into the space? Because if you're visiting a healthcare center or a hospital, there's a good chance that you're already under a certain amount of stress. So how do you design a space that is welcoming, that provides some refuge, and really just constantly shifting between the kind of broader goals of the project and the client to the kind of needs of the individual using the space. I think broadly that would be my my answer. I'm sure I'm leaving out a bunch of other useful advice.
And then, well, we are in the last 5 minutes of this session. Tiffany, I have seen that while you were presenting, there was Beijing, the capital of China, in the list of places. So you have an office there, or you are working there, or you are producing projects there, which is?
So we have an office there. With a whole set of projects that are happening in China predominantly through that Beijing office. It's not a production office. It's another design office. Our work is kind of performed out of each of our different offices with a fair amount of collaboration. But yes, it's not the typical grouping of cities that you think of, Louisville, Beijing, Cincinnati, et cetera. But we had established that office many years ago. I think there were a few staff members who were from Beijing and had gone to school in Cincinnati and worked at the office, and it was the kind of right time to expand into China. And it's been really good in terms of the office, because it helps diversify the organization. So it's a fully functioning office.
It's not difficult to because we have seen, for example, the problem that there was for the Olympic Games, that they had to stop all the vehicles traffic in order to make lower the emissions and to make some kind of fresh air in order. So how you can keep this equilibrium when we are talking about little areas of one city and so huge city?
I think it's interesting. It's interesting to see the kind of different approaches in different places where the kind of political system is varies greatly, right, from here. But having worked at in past organizations that had a kind of large global presence, I think it's useful to kind of see strategies and things applied on a global stage, to take that kind of global knowledge and then figure out how it fits locally. And I think in China particularly, there's a fair amount of regulation that has a positive environmental impact, about like access to daylight, and in sometimes the planning and zoning commissions, you have to have a certain energy performance or things like that. So there's certainly something to be said for that kind of ease of laying out regulations and processes, right? Because it's not a democratic system. But I think sometimes it's also difficult to ensure that it's actually getting done that way. So I think for us, the kind of most useful thing is to just be able to test ideas in different markets and different locations, and see where that kind of leads us. And then also find that people are still kind of the same everywhere you go. And I think much of this audience has lived in many places or traveled or is fairly international. And I think from what I've found, that tends to everybody wants to be comfortable, everybody wants clean air, everybody wants to be treated with respect no matter where you're from. And I think that's those kind of underlying values are always good to remember when you're designing buildings for people.
So thank you very much, Tiffany. We have learned a lot today with your presentation. We have learned that the importance of this affecting positively in the society. It can be an opportunity for designers and architects, that we have to go from linear to circular, and that it's possible to make design for change, that this is something that is really, really important. So, well, I think that now we have to give the new speaker the floor. Thank you very much, Tiffany.
Thank you.